journal entry from an old man. He wrote that one day, a stranger came to their village. He was a young man carrying something large on his back. One of the elders went out to meet him. The elder seemed to like him, and they shook hands. It looked like the stranger was going to stay for a while. In a small village like this, a newcomer was big news. Soon, people started talking. Everyone was curious about the man who had just shown up. They wondered who he was and what he was doing here. My days were always the same. I'd peel potatoes with the elders watching over me. The villagers who knew nothing about swords might have been impressed by the stranger, but I'd been a merchant and seen plenty of swordsmen. To me, his skills were just average. There was nothing special about him at all, so I just went back to my work. His business wasn't my business, but still, I couldn't get him out of my head. There was just something about him, so I decided I'd start checking on him every day, and from that day on, I watched him. 5 years passed, and the man was always there, swinging that sword. 6 years went by, and yet he repeated the same movement over and over again. The sun would go down, and he'd still be at it. Seasons changed, but he never stopped. My own life went on. My daughter was born, but through it all, that man just kept swinging his sword. Even in the pouring rain, he was out there. I started writing it all down. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. The years went by. I got older. My grandson would come visit me in my room, and I'd tell him stories. My daughter Laura would check in on us. My life was full. I had my family. I lived a good life. I was the chief of our small village, and everyone was like family. But there was one place I kept going back to. It was the stranger's training ground, the place where he spent all those years. I remembered the day he finally collapsed. His eyes were full of rage. He never let go of his sword, not even at the very end. Then, after what felt like an entire lifetime, a boy's eyes shot open. He gasped for air, clutching his blanket. He couldn't tell what was real. All he could wonder was, what was that dream? This was the Pereira estate, located south of the Hale Kingdom. Its position near other kingdoms made it well known, but there was something else that made the family even more famous. It was the children of the Pereira family. One of the guards started telling a story, a big grin on his face. He was talking to a couple of other guards. One was a rookie, looking pretty surprised by the whole thing. The other guard, though, looked completely unimpressed. He let out a clearly annoyed by what he was hearing, but the first guard just kept on talking, not caring what the other guy thought. A senior guard told him to stop spouting nonsense in front of the rookie, but then just laughed and decided to play along. See, the family was known for its two children. The first was Kirill Pereira, a genius who became an enchantress at just 11 years old. And the second was Aaron Pereira, the family's lazy son, who had done nothing but sleep for the last 10 years. The guards were just standing around, laughing and making fun of Aaron, but one of them was clearly getting tired of hearing it. Turns out, they weren't alone. Aaron's older sister, Kirill, and his stepmother, Amelia, had heard everything, and Kirill looked absolutely furious. She was not going to let this slide. The guards immediately dropped to the ground, begging for forgiveness, but Kirill called them out, asking why they'd do something they knew they'd have to apologize for. He was sweating bullets, completely terrified. That's when Amelia, the stepmother, put a hand on Kirill's shoulder. She had a calm smile on her face. Her expression was gentle, but you could tell she was the one handling this now. Amelia told the guard to stop gossiping and focus on his work. Her tone was calm, but it was clearly an order, not a suggestion. With that, she and Kirill turned and walked away, leaving the guard sweating in relief. The other guards let out they'd gotten off easy this time. One of them thought about how impressive Kirill was and how scary Amelia could be. With them around, the estate's future seemed bright. But then he remembered the young lord, Aaron. He was the complete opposite of those two. In his room, Aaron suddenly shot up in bed. He was sweating, his eyes wide with panic. The dream felt too real. He tried to calm himself down. All he ever did was sleep, but now, even that wasn't giving him any peace. The dream was over, but the feelings lingered. Every part of it felt completely real. He could still remember the ache in his muscles and the feeling of the sword in his hand. But the strangest thing was his own body. It felt different. It was like the man from the dream had left his incredible will behind, right inside of him. Just then, an attendant walked in and asked if he needed anything. Surprised to see him standing there, Aaron tried to speak, but he couldn't get the words out. The attendant just looked confused. Finally, he managed to say it. He wanted a sword because he wanted to swing it. The attendant's eyes went wide. He couldn't believe what he'd just heard. The attendant led Aaron to the Pereira family training grounds. The place was busy, with knights sparring and staff moving about. Suddenly, two guards stopped dead in their tracks. One of them stared, asking his friend if he was seeing things. Word spread quickly. Another group turned to look, their expressions showing that the unbelievable rumor was true. It was him. The lazy young master had actually shown up at the training grounds. The guards watched him walk by, whispering to each other. They almost never saw him out of his room, so they couldn't figure out what was happening. One of them wondered if he was actually there to train, but the others thought there was no way that could be true. But then Aaron stopped right in front of the weapon rack. The onlookers fell silent, realizing he might actually be serious. The attendant nervously explained that all the wooden swords were different. He admitted he didn't know much about them and offered to find a master swordsman to help, but Aaron didn't seem to be listening. But Aaron just told him that was all right. The attendant was completely confused by the response. Aaron scanned the rack for a moment. His eyes landed on one specific sword, a huge, heavy-looking one. Without a second thought, he grabbed it. The guards watching from the side couldn't believe their eyes. One of them asked his friend to pinch him, just to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The other guard pinched him hard, and he yelled that he got the point. Meanwhile, the The attendant tried to get Aaron's attention, but the young master just walked away with the sword. Aaron took a deep breath, getting ready. The guards just watched, wondering what he was about to do. Even the attendant's jaw dropped. Aaron gripped the sword with both hands, his knuckles turning white. He tried to lift it, but the sword was just too heavy. His arms started shaking from the effort. After just a few seconds, he couldn't hold it anymore. The sword fell from his trembling hands and clattered back onto the rack. Aaron's hands trembled as he tried to support himself on the rack. The two guards watching from above didn't look impressed. One of them sighed, saying this was expected. He thought the young master looked completely pathetic. The other guard agreed, pointing out that Aaron had done nothing but sleep his whole life. He did admit Aaron's starting stance was decent, but he figured this was all because of what happened with the son of Lord Gyron. He reminded his friend about the incident last month, where the son from the neighboring territory had embarrassed the young master pretty badly. Aaron was already out of breath. The guards remembered that he couldn't even say anything back to the boy and had just been holding it in this whole time. They figured it made sense, but it wasn't like he could do anything about it in his current state. Tired of watching, guards decided to get back to work. One of them wondered how long he'd keep this up, betting on 3 days. The other laughed and said he'd bet on 30 minutes. Aaron heard every single word. Just then, an instructor approached him. He told the young master that swordsmanship was a fundamental art, and it would be incredibly difficult to train all by himself. The instructor offered to find him a real mentor and suggested they start fresh tomorrow. But Aaron didn't seem to be listening at all. He just kept swinging. His muscles were on fire, screaming with every single movement. The pain was real, but something else was happening too. He couldn't understand it. His body finally gave out, and he collapsed to the floor. But lying there, completely spent, he felt relaxed for the first time in a long, long time. He wasn't done yet. He pushed himself back up, his hand finding the sword again. He was starting to understand. The more he copied the man from his dream, the lighter the weight in his heart became. With every swing, all the bad memories, the years of doing nothing, they started to fade away. All the bad feelings, all the years of regret, they were just flying away. That's why he couldn't stop himself. He just kept swinging. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his shoulder. It was the attendant, trying to get his attention. The man begged him to stop for the day, yelling that the sun was already about to set. Aaron looked around, completely confused. He had no idea what the man was talking about. Then his body just gave out. The attendant caught him, asking if he was all right. Aaron could barely speak. His throat felt numb. He'd pushed himself way too far. He looked out the window. The sun really was setting. He'd lost track of the entire day. Aaron asked the attendant why he waited for him the whole time. The man explained that he couldn't just leave him, and that he'd been calling out for a while. But Aaron hadn't responded at all. The attendant told him to go inside and rest, warning him not to push himself so hard again. Aaron just mumbled back, not even sure if he'd be back to train another day. Later that night, he was in agony. His entire body was sore, and he couldn't believe he was so stupid to try and copy what he saw in his dream. He was sure the pain was so bad, there was no way he'd be able to fall asleep. But just 5 minutes later, he was out cold. A few days passed. Aaron was up early, eating breakfast. He seemed to have a real appetite for the first time in years. An attendant watched him, completely stunned. He asked if Aaron was really going to the training grounds again. Aaron just gave a simple, yeah. That first day wasn't a one-time thing after all. After that first day, the dream kept coming back to him. So, to satisfy the strange urges in his body, he found himself swinging a sword every single day. He didn't really understand it, but whenever he swung the sword, all his wandering thoughts just disappeared. It felt like he was gaining something from it, so he figured it couldn't be a bad thing. He realized he needed to eat a lot more if he was going to keep swinging that sword. He called out for more milk and sandwiches, and the attendant quickly agreed to bring them. Elsewhere, two men were talking about an event happening that day. One of them seemed excited, saying he was looking forward to the results. One guard confidently said he'd be the winner either way. He asked a rookie for his opinion, but their conversation was cut short when a voice behind them asked for directions. It was an old man with a long white beard and a walking stick. He smiled and asked the guard how to get to the training grounds. The guard was suspicious, demanding to know who he was and why he wanted to go there. The old man just explained that he was a wandering knight who wanted to visit while he was in the territory. He assured them he had permission to be there. He started patting his clothes, trying to find the permit. The guards just stared back, clearly not sure what to make of him. The guard sighed and told the old man it was fine. Their shift was almost over, so they'd take him to the training grounds on their way there. A few moments later, they arrived at the entrance. One of the guards smirked, saying it was time to check who won their bet. But when he looked inside, his eyes went wide. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was Iron Pereira, the young master. He was actually there, training. One of the guards whispered that this was his 4th day in a row. The blonde guard threw his hands up in celebration. He'd won the bet and demanded his payment. The other guard grumbled and tossed him a pouch of money. The losing guard couldn't believe Aaron had shown up 4 days straight. The winner explained that he knew this would happen. Turns out, the son of Lord Gyron had embarrassed Aaron last month, so he figured the young master would train for at least a week out of pure spite. The losing guard was furious, yelling at his friend for not telling him something so important. As they argued, the wandering knight stood back, watching the whole thing unfold in silence. The old man watched Aaron train. He could tell the boy was serious. not just messing around, but his swordsmanship was terrible. He had no strength, no stamina, and could barely handle the weight of the sword. The old man wondered how long this would last. He'd heard Eren only started training because of a petty fight, which wasn't a good reason to pick up a sword. He figured the boy would give up sooner, rather than later. But just as he thought that, a powerful gust of wind kicked up out of nowhere. The guards looked around, confused. They had no idea where it was coming from. One of the guards gasped, pointing up at the sky. A griffin, a creature straight out of legends, was circling above the training grounds, and riding on its back was none other than Kirill. The griffin was a creature of legend. It had the body of a lion, the head of an eagle, and skin as tough as steel. It wasn't supposed to be real, so the guards were completely stunned to see one right in front of them. Kirill jumped down from its back. The creature landed with a heavy thud, cracking the stone ground and sending the guards scrambling backwards. Kirill didn't even flinch. She calmly stroked the griffin's fur. This was her unique ability. She could make her own creations move, putting energy into them as if they were truly alive. This was the famous skill of the enchantress, Kirill Pereira. She pointed a finger directly at one of the guards. He snapped to attention, sweating nervously. Kirill's eyes were sharp and serious. Then she pointed to the next guard, and the one after that. She was calling them out one by one. Before the old man could finish introducing himself, Kirill turned her attention to all three guards. She demanded to know why they were just standing around when they were supposed to be on duty. One of the guards tried to explain, saying they'd switched shifts properly and hadn't caused any trouble. But Kirill cut him off, furious that he would dare interrupt her. She told them they were habitually undisciplined. Just then, a voice called out her name, stopping her mid-sentence. Kirill turned, startled. It was Eren. He was breathing heavily from his training and asked what was going on. Kirill just stared at him, her anger fading into silence. After a moment, she finally spoke, but not to the guards. She looked right at Eren and told him to quit it. When he looked confused, she told him to stop doing stupid things like this. Eren didn't say a word back. He just stood there, looking down. For a second, he looked completely exhausted, but then Kirill's eyes widened in surprise. Instead of stopping, Eren turned back to the training post and gripped it tightly. He wasn't done. Kirill didn't hold back. She asked Eren if he really thought swordsmanship was so easy. She told him that after sleeping his life away, swinging a wooden sword for a few days wouldn't change a thing. She called his swordsmanship terrible, even pointing out that the rookie guard was much better than he was. She started to ask if he was only doing this because of what happened 2 weeks ago, but a calm voice suddenly called out her name. Everyone turned. A woman was standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at them. It was their mother. She smiled and told Kirill to stop bothering her brother and to come to her. Kirill started to protest, but her mother's tone was firm. She simply said something. Kirill fell silent and looked away. With the matter settled, she told the guards they did a good job. Then she turned to Eren, gently reminding him not to overdo it. Exhausted, he just nodded in agreement. He watched his mother and sister walk away, leaving him alone in the training grounds. The guards all let out in of relief, but their peace was short-lived when the griffin suddenly let out a loud squawk, making them all jump. The old man watched from the side. He wondered why the griffin was still there, thinking to himself that Kirill's visit felt like a storm had just blown through. Even after all that, Eren's focus didn't break for a second. He was already back in his stance. This impressed the old knight. He decided he'd stick around and watch the boy for a few more days. Hours later, after pushing himself to the limit, Eren finally headed back inside. In the hallway, a maid was stopped by an attendant. She looked startled as she explained that the young master was already asleep. The man didn't seem to mind. He simply said he had business with Eren and that it could wait until he woke up. But the attendant's words made Kirill stop in her tracks. She whipped around, furious, and asked if he was seriously talking back to her. The attendant started sweating. He couldn't believe the intense pressure coming from her. She just scoffed, and the man flinched away from her. She warned him not to tell anyone about what happened today. She made it very clear he knew what the consequences would be. And with that, she left him standing alone in the hall, completely rattled. Back in his room, Eren was sound asleep. A small cat in a top hat was playing a flute right next to his bed. The music slowly pulled him out of his sleep, and his eyes fluttered open. He sat up, staring at the strange creature. The cat stopped playing, held out an envelope, and dropped it right on the floor. He opened the envelope. It was a letter from his sister, Kirill. She was apologizing for what she said earlier, explaining that she was just really worried when she heard he was overworking himself and not even eating. As he read, the little creature placed a doll on his bed. Kirill's letter said it would help him rest. She also asked him to keep her visit a secret from their mom, who had told her not to come. Then he noticed something written on the back. It was another note, this time from his mom. She playfully told him to let her know if Kirill was being annoying, and that she'd pretend not to know anything. It all hit him at once. Even after all those years he'd spent doing nothing, his sister and mother still cared about him this much. Just then, an attendant opened the door and announced that his meal was ready. Eren looked up, a decision forming in his mind. He got out of bed. He wasn't going to eat alone anymore. He decided he would eat with his family tonight. The attendant couldn't believe it. He ran down the hall, completely stunned. The young master had finally, truly changed. At dinner, Kirill kept putting food on her brother's plate. She kept piling it higher and higher until their mother gently told her to calm down. Eren just sat there quietly, taking it all in. Then, he finally spoke. He thanked his father, his mother, and his sister for taking care of him. All those years he just laid in bed doing nothing. He admitted he could never bring himself to say it before. He apologized and told them that he loved loved them. His father's face softened, and he told Aaron he loved him too, and that he was sorry for making him worry. The father smiled, telling him there was no need for any of that. He just wanted them to finish their meal. But a moment later, his father thought of something else. He'd heard Aaron was focusing on swordsmanship lately. He said it was good that he was training, but he didn't want his son to overwork himself. Aaron promised he wasn't overdoing it, and that there was no need to worry. But he was thinking to himself, compared to the training in his dreams, this was nothing. Time went on. At the training grounds, two guards were talking. One of them asked how long it had been. The other confirmed it had been about 15 days. They couldn't believe the young master had trained for 15 days straight without missing a single one. They kept expecting him to hit his limit, but he just wouldn't stop. One of the guards then pointed out an old man who'd been watching the training every day. He apparently had permission to be there, but they had no idea what he found so interesting. The old man had been watching Aaron for a while now. At first, he figured the boy had only started training because his pride was hurt, and that he'd give up soon enough. But he was completely wrong. The boy everyone called the deadbeat noble was something else. He couldn't understand it. How could someone who had never even exercised suddenly train like this, day after day, without showing any sign of wanting to quit? It was like watching a blacksmith who had hammered steel his entire life. Aaron moved with a kind of focus that looked like it had been built over decades. The old man thought to himself that in his entire life, he'd never seen anyone with that kind of willpower. But then, a new thought struck him. He realized that an iron will was something that usually only came with old age, even for the greatest of heroes. And yet, he saw that same strength in this 15-year-old boy. He started to wonder what would happen if Aaron kept training, if his potential was guided by the right mentor. If that happened, just how high would he be able to go? Aaron kept swinging the heavy sword, his focus absolute. The old man watched him, deep in thought. Finally, the old man decided to act. He called over one of the caretakers, a man named Yangban, and told him he had a question. He pointed over at Aaron and asked if the young noble had ever received swordsman training before. Yangban shook his head. He explained that while the Lord planned to get him lessons soon, Aaron had been practicing all on his own, without any master to guide him. The old man then asked who the training master was going to be. Yangban started to say it was Knight Juker, but the old man cut him off with a furious look. He remembered Juker getting drunk the night before his training, screaming at the soldiers. The old man was disgusted. He couldn't let a true gem like Aaron be taught by a scoundrel like that. He decided right then and there, he couldn't just stand on the sidelines and watch this happen. He had to meet the Lord of the house immediately. The old man met with Aaron's father, the Lord of the house. The Lord couldn't believe what he was hearing, but the old man insisted that every word was true. He was stunned. The old man was claiming his son had amazing potential, but the father was still hesitant to believe it. The old man had a recommendation letter for the Chrono Swordsmanship School. It was the best academy on the continent, a place that only accepted the most talented children. The school didn't care about your family name or where you came from. If you were good enough to get in, you were treated like a noble. Its reputation was even greater than the royal academies. But the father knew that getting in was one thing, surviving there was another. He worried if Aaron could really handle that kind of endless, brutal competition. That's when Aaron was called into the room, looking completely confused. His father looked at him and laid out the choice. He told Aaron about the school, but made it clear that he wouldn't force him. If he didn't want to go, all he had to do was say so. His father wanted him to understand just how hard this path would be. Aaron listened, then asked for some time to think it over. His father understood. Alone in his room, the doubt started to creep in. He wondered if he could really do well. After 10 years of doing nothing but sleeping, how could he possibly compete with everyone else? But then, something inside him hardened. He clenched his fist. He was done just laying still. He had to do this for himself, and for the family that had always been there for him. With his mind made up, he walked back into the room and called out to his father. He looked his father in the eyes and announced his decision. He was going to do it. Aaron said his goodbyes. The moment had finally come for him to leave. His family wished him well, telling him they'd see him soon. And with that, his journey began. Inside the carriage, the servant asked if this was his first time traveling alone. Aaron quietly admitted that it was. Then, the servant held out a small gift. He explained that Kirill had asked him to pass it along. It was a small, sword-shaped charm. Aaron held it close, thankful for his sister's thoughtfulness. A moment later, the servant announced that they had arrived. Aaron looked out the window, completely stunned. This was the Chrono Swordsmanship School. It was bigger and more impressive than he could have ever imagined. The servant offered to walk him all the way to the entrance. Aaron told him it was fine, which caught the servant completely off guard. He explained that from now on, he was just a trainee and needed to get used to doing things by himself. The servant was clearly moved, proud of how much the young master had grown. Aaron turned towards the massive school gates with a confident smile and promised he would be back. The servant bowed, hoping he'd return with great results. Aaron didn't look back. He walked alone toward the main gate, where other people were already gathered. As Aaron got closer, he saw a guard announcing the arrival of another trainee. This was Bart Lloyd, the son of a count, who came with a recommendation from a famous knight. The guard was practically falling over himself to welcome Bart Lloyd, making a huge deal about his noble bloodline. One of the other guards noticed someone else had arrived. It was Aaron's turn. He stepped forward and handed over his letter, introducing himself and explaining he was recommended by a wandering knight. The guard's tone changed. He still called it an honor, but it wasn't the same level of excitement he showed for the son of a count. Then, the guard recognized the knight's name. He knew Sir Bran Somerville was a famous hero who'd been fighting for decades. With a recommendation like that, he was sure Aaron would pass the test easily. He pointed Aaron towards the auditorium and wished him luck. Aaron thanked him and headed inside. As soon as Aaron was out of earshot, the guards started talking. One of them couldn't believe Somerville would recommend anyone. That's when the other guard asked, wasn't that the deadbeat noble? The guard recognized the knight's name. He knew Sir Bran Somerville was a famous hero who'd been fighting for decades. With a recommendation like that, he was sure Aaron would pass the test easily. He pointed Aaron towards the auditorium and wished him luck. Aaron thanked him and headed inside. As soon as Aaron was out of earshot, the guards started talking. One of them couldn't believe Somerville would recommend anyone. That's when the other guard asked, wasn't that the deadbeat noble? The first guard had never heard the name, so his partner filled him in. One of them couldn't believe Somerville would recommend anyone. That's when the other guard asked, wasn't that the deadbeat noble? The first guard had never heard the name, so his partner filled him in. He was talking about the lazy kid from the Pereira family. The other guard looked at Aaron's back and said that, now that he mentioned it, he could kind of see it. The guard thought to himself that Aaron looked a lot weaker in person. He couldn't figure out what the picky old knight saw in him, but he knew they'd find out soon enough. Aaron took a breath and pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The door swung open, revealing a massive room inside. As he stepped inside, every single head in the room turned to look at him. The hall was packed with other young nobles, and all of them were staring right at him. He could feel their eyes on him. It felt like everyone in the room was glaring. He told himself to stay calm, but among the faces in the crowd, a few stood out, looking especially serious. That's when his attention was pulled to the front of the room. A man in armor was walking towards the center of the stage. The man in armor introduced himself as their instructor. He welcomed all 400 of them, but he made sure to call them preliminary trainees. He scanned the crowd, looking them over. He commented that he saw some impressive faces this time around. His eyes landed on one person in particular, Ilya Lindsay. He called her the second genius from her family and openly wondered if she was really more talented than her brother. The mention of her name sent a ripple through the crowd. One of the other nobles couldn't believe she was actually there. He was instantly frustrated. With Ilya in the running, his shot at being number one was completely gone. The instructor continued his speech, making one thing very clear. He reminded them they weren't full trainees yet, and that the road ahead was going to be tough. He laid out the terms. They had to pass 2 hard tests just to stay for a year. Even if they succeeded, they'd still be on probation, and he promised them that things would only get harder from there. With a grin, he gave them their first order. They were to leave everything behind in the hall and head outside. The instructor led them all outside to a massive training ground. He told them there was a place he wanted to show them. He explained that it was a simple running course designed to test their endurance and physical strength. He planted his foot firmly on the ground, ready to begin. Without any more warning, he shouted that the physical fitness test was starting. He told everyone to run, but just as they started, he complained that the pace was boring and decided to speed things up. He was actually surprised they were keeping up, so he yelled for them to pick up the pace again. The trainees were already starting to struggle. One of the nobles decided to play it smart. He figured it was a marathon, so he'd hang back and save his energy. As he ran, he looked over his shoulder and saw Aaron already on the ground, completely out of breath. The noble smirked, thinking to himself that Aaron really earned his deadbeat nickname. Aaron's heart felt like it was going to explode. The pain was just too much. He felt like he couldn't go on. He finally collapsed onto the ground as the rest of the trainees ran right past him. The instructor glanced back for a second, but kept the pace without a word. From the ground, he watched the group disappear into the distance. His body was screaming at him to stop. He couldn't take another step, but something inside him refused to quit. He slammed his foot down, pushing himself back to his feet. One of the other trainees looked back, completely shocked. A voice in his head screamed at him to get up. He forced himself to start running again, ignoring the pain. He gritted his teeth, a crazy smile on his face. This pain was nothing. Not when he compared it to the man from his dream, who had trained his entire life without ever stopping. Aaron wanted to be just like him. He had to reach that same level. And to do that, there was only one thing he could do. He had to keep running. He was done being a deadbeat. He screamed it with The instructor watched from a bench, completely surprised. He had been sure that Aaron would give up immediately, but Aaron was in bad shape. He was just a shadow of himself, stumbling forward. He fought for every single breath, his body shaking with the effort. And then, his body finally gave out. He started to fall as the other trainees just ran right past him. But before he hit the ground, someone caught him. It was the instructor, moving in a blur. He carried Aaron to the side of the track while the test continued on without them. He laid Aaron down on the grass. The instructor could tell he was completely exhausted, having pushed himself way past his body's limits. Looking down at the boy, the instructor couldn't help but think, this kid was interesting. When Aaron finally opened his eyes, he was in a bed he didn't recognize. He sat up, wondering where he was. A voice from the side of the room let him know he was awake. The man told him not to worry, that his body was completely fine. He introduced himself as Instructor Run Tarhal, the one in charge of the recovery room. Aaron thanked him, but the instructor just laughed, boasting that his skills were the reason Aaron recovered so fast. Run Tarhal teased him, saying he'd probably be seeing Aaron a lot. When Aaron just agreed seriously, the instructor had to admit he was only joking. Then, he handed Aaron a scroll. He explained that it was the rankings from the fitness test. He told Aaron not to worry though, since since it was just a quick check and didn't affect his official admission. Aaron stared at the scroll. His name was at the very bottom, rank 400, dead last. Run Tarhal laughed, explaining that the rankings were meant to make the top students feel good and push the lower ones to work harder. He told Aaron not to worry, since the ranks would be completely different in a year anyway. But then he paused, confused. He was trying to comfort him, but it wasn't having any effect. Aaron just calmly accepted it. The instructor was surprised. Aaron wasn't sad or disappointed at all. He thought to himself that the rumors were right. This kid was interesting. With that, Runtarhal pushed Aaron out of the room, telling him he couldn't skip his first day. Later, all the preliminary trainees were gathered in a large hall. An instructor stood at the front, greeting them and asking if they slept well. He laughed, glad to see them doing well. He introduced himself as Karaka, one of the instructors who would be teaching them. He then laid out their new life. A strict schedule was posted for everyone to see, packed with training and classes from morning until night. This was their routine now. Karaka told them that after their daily routines, they'd have free time. The training rooms would be open for anyone who wanted to do extra practice. Aaron's face lit up. This was perfect. He could finally start training with his sword, but Karaka wasn't finished. He held up a finger, adding one more thing. He announced that any kind of weapon training was strictly forbidden. Aaron couldn't believe it. The sun began to set on their first day at the academy. After a long day of classes, the trainees started heading back. One of the trainees started complaining to the blue-haired noble, Sir Lloyd, about how boring their theory class was. Lloyd shot back that it was only boring because the kid was too dumb to understand it. Then he told him to shut up. Sir Lloyd and the others walked into the training room. It was huge and already packed with people working out. One of the trainees scoffed, saying everyone was going hard on the first day, but would burn out soon enough. But then Lloyd's attention was caught by something across the room. Someone was lifting an insane amount of weight. It was a girl with silver hair, her muscles straining with the effort. She lifted the entire thing like it was nothing. Lloyd recognized her immediately. It was Ilya Lindsay. He realized the rumors about her didn't even come close to the real thing. She didn't seem like a preliminary trainee at all. Just watching her made him feel completely out of his league. He felt like they were standing on two different cliffs with no way to cross the gap. She was just on another level entirely. The other trainees couldn't believe it either. They couldn't understand how someone only a year older than them could be that strong. Then their attention shifted. They noticed Aaron, the so-called deadbeat, was actually training too. The two guys started laughing. They admitted he was working hard, but thought it was ridiculous that he'd waste 15 years just to start trying now. They joked that he was probably going to faint again. But across the room, Ilya Lindsay was watching him. Brad had seen enough. He told his friends to stop wasting their time and walked away. His attention landed on a girl with fiery red hair. He remembered her as Judith, the commoner, who had beaten him for second place in the test. He knew she had to be strong to be here, but there was something else about her, something that really caught his eye. Brat watched her, his mind fixed on one thought. He refused to lose to her ever again. Suddenly, Judith spun around and yelled at him, telling him to stop staring at her. Brat was completely stunned. He stammered, asking if she was actually talking to him. She called him an idiot and told him to get lost. His staring was breaking her concentration. That's when Brat's friends stepped in. They shouted at Judith, reminding her that she was talking to the young master of the noble Lloyd family. One of them demanded she get on her knees and beg for mercy. Judith just smirked and made a sarcastic comment about his bad breath. She started to tell him to shut up, but then she trailed off. Her eyes were fixed on something behind them. Brat didn't understand what was happening. He turned around, trying to see what had made her stop talking. It was Aaron. Both Judith and Brat were staring at him, completely stunned. But it wasn't just him. The famous Ilya Lindsay was standing right over Aaron as he trained. She asked if they could talk. Her request was quiet, but direct. Aaron was completely confused by the sudden attention. Judith just watched, her earlier anger forgotten. Ilya leaned in and said something to him that no one else could hear. Brat and his friends just stared, completely baffled. They couldn't understand why a prodigy like her would even notice the deadbeat noble. After a moment, she turned and walked away, leaving Aaron sitting alone. She left the training room without another word, the heavy doors closing behind her. Aaron just sat there, completely stunned by what had just happened. He glanced over at the others, who were all still staring at him. Judith turned back to the training dummies, hitting them with everything she had. In the background, Aaron had already gone back to his workout, ignoring everyone. Brat admitted that he couldn't hear a single word of what Ilya had said. One of the other trainees tried to stop Judith, asking where she was going. She just pushed right past him. Aaron didn't seem to notice any of it. He was completely lost in his workout. But then, Judith stopped and shouted at him. Aaron looked up, surprised to see her standing right over him. She accused him of ignoring her, demanding to know why he didn't answer. Aaron, completely caught off guard, just apologized and asked what was wrong. Judith cut him off, saying she had no interest in talking to him. She just wanted an answer, and she wanted it now. Aaron had no idea what she was talking about. She leaned in close, her eyes filled with fire. She demanded to know what Ilya Lindsay had talked to him about. Hey, real quick, my mom said this channel would get 0 subscribers. If you enjoyed this story so far, click subscribe to watch the next part. And told her what Ilya had said. Judith just stared back, completely stunned. She couldn't believe it. She accused him of messing with her, asking if he really expected her to think that Ilya only taught him how to use the equipment. Aaron nervously insisted that it was the truth. She kept pressing, demanding to know what his relationship with Ilya was. She asked if they knew each other from before or if she was his girlfriend. Aaron just told her it was the first time he had ever seen her. Finally, she backed off. She told him to get rid of his scared expression so no one would think she was bullying him. Then she turned and walked away. Aaron tried to get back to his workout, thinking about what Ilya had told him. But before he could, another voice called out to him. It was Brat Lloyd. He asked Aaron to tell him what he and Ilya had talked about. And, if possible, he wanted to know about his conversation with the red-haired girl too. A month passed. The trainees were getting tired of the same routine every single day. One of them complained that it was ridiculous. They still couldn't even use their swords. Brat just listened, saying nothing. Brat watched from across the room as Ilya coached Aaron, correcting his form. She stood over him, telling him to breathe evenly as he struggled with the weight. Brat started his own stretches, trying to convince himself that he didn't need to think about those two. But he knew he couldn't just stay calm if he wanted to beat someone like Ilya Lindsay. Aaron Pereira, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Brat was sure he only got in because of his family's influence. He couldn't imagine how a guy like that, who had never tried hard at anything, could possibly reach his level. He figured that all the attention from Ilya might be pushing him now, but it wouldn't last. The moment things got tough, he'd fall back into his old ways. He'd go right back to being a deadbeat noble. Brat turned to his friends, his mind made up. He told them they were heading to the tracks, declaring that his new goal was to take second place. He didn't waste a second, heading straight for the training grounds. But when he got there, he stopped. Judith was already running, pushing herself to the limit. Brat's friends commented that Judith had to work that hard just to stay in the school because she was a commoner. That comment seemed to hit a nerve with Aaron. He stood on the track and told his friend it was time to start running. The other trainee was shocked he wanted to start already. Aaron told him that if it was too much, he could just follow slowly from behind. But then he added a challenge. If his friend thought he could handle it, he needed to give it everything he had and keep up. 3 months passed. 2 men walked into the training hall. The place was buzzing with energy. One of them commented on how hard everyone was working. The other agreed, impressed by this year's group. He pointed out the top 3, who were all training separately, pushing themselves as usual. Then his gaze landed on someone else. He started to call him the deadbeat, but stopped himself. He watched Aaron lifting weights, covered in sweat. Yeah, you couldn't call him a deadbeat noble anymore. Later, all the trainees were gathered in a large hall. An instructor stood at the front, ready to make an announcement. He told them that the time had finally come. It was time for their midterm evaluation. The instructor cracked his knuckles. Things were about to get serious. The instructor unrolled a huge map, showing them the course for the midterm evaluation. He explained that all they had to do was finish before the time ran out. The students started murmuring amongst themselves. Looking at the course, they thought it was impossible, but the instructor just smiled. He told them it wasn't that difficult. The course was just a mix of everything they'd learned in the last 4 months, including running and swimming. He said the rankings didn't matter, just finishing on time. Then he dropped a bombshell. The swordmaster himself would be giving awards to the top 5 trainees. That got everyone's attention. The instructor announced the evaluation would start in exactly 10 days. Until then, there would be no classes. He told them to use the time to prepare and wished them all good luck. As the students started to leave, Brat's friends gathered around him. One of them worriedly asked if he'd be okay, but the other just laughed, completely confident in Sir Lloyd's abilities. Brat wasn't worried at all. He figured with people like Ilya Lindsay and Judith in the mix, he'd easily make it into the top 5. He was sure of it. But then a thought crossed his mind, a flicker of doubt. Something didn't feel right. Brat couldn't shake the thought of Aaron. He just couldn't figure out why the guy bothered him so much. Meanwhile, at the academy, the trainees were hard at work. Inside the training hall, Judith grunted, pushing through her final lift. She dropped the weight, excited that she'd hit a new record. Feeling good, she decided that was enough for the day. But as she was about to leave, a sound made her turn. She looked annoyed. It was Aaron. He was on the floor, completely out of breath, but he was still training. Judith watched him, realizing he was pushing past his limits again. It was obvious he'd gotten a lot stronger since he first arrived. She couldn't understand it. As Aaron struggled to lift another heavy weight, she just stared, wondering how he could possibly keep going. Judith clenched her fist. She couldn't understand how Aaron kept going. It bothered her that she had less drive than a guy everyone called a deadbeat noble. She refused to accept it. Fueled by pure anger, she went back to lifting, pushing herself even harder. Elsewhere in the academy, 2 instructors were talking. One of them asked how many trainees were competing this year, guessing it was around 30. The other instructor agreed that 30 was a lot. That's when they realized someone had walked up behind them. They were shocked to see it was the schoolmaster. The old man smiled. His name was Ian, the master of the Chrono Swordsmanship School. He explained that he preferred to see things for himself rather than just hear about them. Ian turned to one of the men and shook his hand, welcoming him as the new assistant from the Adin Kingdom. The assistant said it was an honor to finally meet him. Ian grinned and put the assistant on the spot, asking him to guess how old he looked. The assistant got nervous and stammered out a guess 52. Ian burst out laughing. He said he didn't like people who tried to flatter him, but he found the guess so funny, he'd double the assistant's salary. Turns out, the old man was actually 90 years old. The assistant praised the instructor, saying this year's trainees were on another level. As they talked, Ian looked on, his expression thoughtful. His eyes landed on a girl with silver hair. The assistant explained that she was Ilya Lindsay, the second genius from her family. He added that she'd never lost first place in any test. Ian watched her with a sad look. He felt bad for her, thinking she was too obsessed with walking someone else's path instead of finding her own. Then, their attention turned to the red-haired girl. Ian asked if she was the one the instructor had mentioned before, and the man confirmed she was. The assistant pointed out that she was definitely overdoing it. The instructor agreed, admitting he'd tried to stop her, but she was the most stubborn trainee he'd ever met. Ian said they should have stopped her anyway. He was worried she'd collapse and waste her talent. He decided to go talk to her himself, saying there must be a reason she was pushing so hard. The instructors watched, sure that she'd have to stop for the master. But as Ian approached, Judith just kept going, completely ignoring him. The two men couldn't believe what they were seeing. When Ian came back, the instructor asked what happened. The old man just laughed. He said she really was stubborn and had told him she'd stop if he gave her a good reason to. After dealing with Judith, Ian turned his attention to another trainee. He asked where Aaron Pereira was. The sound of heavy weights echoed from another part of the training hall. The instructors were already there, watching Aaron in disbelief. One of them said he'd been going for almost 30 minutes straight. Aaron was just pushing through the pain, his body straining under the weight. Ian walked over to watch him, a curious smile on his face. He told the other instructors to let him be. When they questioned it, Ian was firm. He ordered them not to stop Aaron unless the boy gave up himself. Ian could see it clearly. The boy's mind had perfect control over his body. Finally, after pushing past every single limit, he collapsed, completely spent. Aaron lay in bed, completely drained. Every muscle in his body ached. He thought about how much had changed in just a few months. The same people who used to mock him were now watching his every move. It felt strange. He especially couldn't figure out why Ilya was helping him. She didn't seem like the type to help someone just because she felt bad for them. He decided it was too much to think about right now. He just needed to rest. As he drifted off, he found himself somewhere else. He was a child again, being held by someone. He knew this place. It had been a long time. This was it. This was the reason he never wanted to leave his bed. He just wanted to keep coming back here, to her. He knew it wasn't his real mother's arms, but it felt just as warm. Part of him wanted to stay like this forever, to just keep sleeping. But then, the dream changed. He saw the man again, the one who had swung his sword for a lifetime. The warmth started to disappear, pulling away from him. He tried to hold on, not wanting to let go, but he couldn't stop it. He had to let go. He looked back one last time, smiling. He was grateful for everything. Now, it was time to move forward. A single thought cut through everything. He knew he had to go. And just like that, Aaron sat up. A strange, dark energy seemed to steam off of him. He got out of bed and clenched his fists. The time for sleeping was over. The morning of the midterm evaluation arrived. As the trainees gathered, all eyes were on Aaron. They whispered among themselves, wondering if he had even slept at all. One of them scoffed, calling him a dummy. He figured all that training was useless if it wasn't for actual combat. His attention then shifted to Judith. He could tell she'd been pushing herself too hard lately and was in bad shape. A smirk spread across his face. With his main competition already running on empty, he was sure second place was his for the taking. Aaron stood by himself, completely focused. From a distance, Ilya watched him silently. An instructor's voice boomed across the training ground, demanding everyone's attention. He announced he would explain the rules one last time. He laid out the course. It had 4 stages, with an instructor at each one. Once a trainee met the goal for a stage, they could move on to the next. He reminded them that this was a test of their own growth. They shouldn't worry about what others were doing. With that, he told them to get ready. The instructor yelled, and just like that, the test began. The 4 main rivals stared each other down, ready to go. The first event was the push press. As expected, Ilya was in a league of her own, lifting the weight with ease. One of the other top trainees watched her in disbelief. He knew he could never be that fast, no matter how much he trained. Still, he was sure he could beat everyone else. But then he saw something that made him stop. He couldn't believe his eyes. It was Aaron. He grunted with every single lift, his entire body trembling from the effort. He let out a huge roar, forcing the weight up with everything he had. The other trainees stared, completely stunned. He couldn't understand what he was seeing, wondering if Aaron was trying to kill himself from exhaustion. Just as everyone expected, Ilya finished stage 1 first. She didn't even look tired. The other trainees couldn't believe it. She was just too fast. But then, another name was called out. It was Aaron Pereira. The other trainee's jaw dropped. Somehow, he had passed stage 1. He was drenched in sweat and barely standing, but he'd done it. The others just laughed it off. They were sure he'd collapse any second now, but Aaron didn't care what they thought. He moved right on to stage 2, the box jump. As he jumped, he realized something was different. His body felt hot, full of energy he'd never felt before. It didn't feel like he was pushing himself too hard anymore. He wondered if this sudden burst of power would just burn him out. But Aaron refused to burn out. He pushed himself harder, faster, demanding more with every single jump. It still wasn't enough for him. The instructor watched in disbelief. Finally, he had to call it out. Aaron Pereira had passed stage 2. The other trainees were completely lost. How is this even possible? But Aaron wasn't the only one giving it their all. Judith was in a world of her own, fighting against the heavyweights. And watching over them all, the old instructor just smiled. With no time to rest, the trainees were thrown right into stage 3, a long-distance run. Aaron was already pushing his body to its absolute limit. Up ahead, Ilya was running effortlessly, leaving everyone else in the dust. Aaron just focused on putting one foot in front of the other. But something was different this time. He wasn't just enduring the pain anymore. Even Ilya, far ahead, felt a strange shift in the air. She couldn't figure out what it was. Aaron was feeling it too. It was weird, like a fire was starting to burn inside him. This wasn't just willpower. It was something else entirely, a powerful feeling he'd never experienced before. His exhaustion was fading away, replaced by a single, clear thought. He wanted to run, not just to finish, but to catch the person in front of him. He had a single goal now, to surpass her. And with that one thought, he started to close the distance. He was going after Ilya, but as he pushed himself, he noticed something else. It wasn't just him. Judith was running with everything she had, right on Ilya's heels. He couldn't believe her intensity. For Judith, this was more than just a race. She screamed in her mind that she would never lose, not after everything she'd been through to get here. She remembered all the times she had pushed herself until she collapsed. She remembered hearing people talk behind her back, surprised she'd even made it into Chrono. They said the school was full of geniuses, implying she was nothing special. She remembered the words that always pushed her, the idea that once someone is told they're special, they start to lose touch with reality and act like they're better than everyone. That thought made her clench her fist, but she was done listening to that nonsense. She screamed back in her mind, furious that anyone would dare say that without knowing how hard she'd worked to get here. She promised herself she wouldn't lose to anyone, not ever. With one last mental roar, she dove into the water. The fourth and final stage of the evaluation had begun, a long-distance swim. Judith pushed through the water, gasping for every breath, but her body was screaming at her to stop. Every muscle was starting to give out. She couldn't believe it. Of all the times for her body to fail, it had to be now. That's when she saw him. Aaron was pulling ahead, leaving her behind. She knew she had pushed herself too hard before the swim even started, but she couldn't accept it. Did it mean that even when she gave her absolute all, she still couldn't beat him? He was just getting further and further away. The frustration was just too much. She broke down, tears mixing with the water. She just gave up. Her body went limp, and she started sinking into the darkness. Below her, someone was waiting. Suddenly, a huge splash. She barely had time to register what was happening. It was Aaron. He had come back for her. He grabbed her and pulled her towards the surface, and she coughed up water, finally able to breathe again. He struggled to keep them both afloat, pulling Judith through the water with everything he had left. She was furious, demanding to know what he was doing. She couldn't believe he'd thrown away his own race to save her. Aaron just kept swimming, telling her not to worry because they were almost there. But to Judith, this whole thing was just annoying. He finally dragged them both onto the shore and collapsed, completely out of breath. Just then, another student ran up to help. He told Aaron to leave Judith with him and get back to the race. Aaron didn't hesitate for a second. With Judith safe, he turned and started running again. The student yelled after him to hurry up and go. Judith just lay there, gritting her teeth. She was safe, but she had been completely defeated. She watched him dive back into the water to finish the race. Through her tears, she could only think one thing. He was a complete idiot. She collapsed onto the sand, completely broken. Elsewhere, another trainee was having a similar breakdown. He cried that he couldn't keep up, no matter how hard he'd worked. An instructor walked over and told him not to get discouraged. He explained that there was still a second evaluation with easier standards, so he could still pass if he didn't give up. The instructor then turned to his colleague, saying he was surprised by how many students had passed the first evaluation this year. He agreed, saying something felt different about this year's class. He mentioned there were a lot of talented kids, but the most interesting part of the evaluation was something else. He called Aaron Pereira the hero of the day, the same kid who had just ranked 34th out of 35 successful candidates. But not everyone was impressed. Another student sneered, calling Aaron a hopeless fool for what he did. He wondered if Aaron was just trying to act like a hero. One of the trainees, Lance, was celebrating his 5th place finish. His friends teased him about it, but they were genuinely happy for him, even a little jealous. He'd be getting a reward from the swordmaster. That's when Sir Lloyd walked over and congratulated Lance personally. Another student thanked Lloyd for his guidance during the training. Lloyd just brushed it off, saying the student was the one who earned his rank. The student then congratulated Lloyd on getting 2nd place, but Lloyd didn't seem happy about it at all. He was thinking about Aaron. He knew the performance Aaron showed during the evaluation was on a completely different level. He knew that if Judith hadn't burned out, he would have only placed 4th. Looking at Aaron, he had to admit it to himself. It was his total defeat. The very next day, Aaron was already back on the path, training. He was completely out of breath, but he was still pushing himself. Suddenly, a voice cut through the air, asking him why he did it. He looked up. It was Ilya, and she was walking straight toward him with a very serious look on her face. Aaron had no idea what she was talking about, but Ilya insisted that he knew exactly what she meant. She wouldn't let it go. Aaron turned to face her, still looking completely lost. He finally put it together and asked if she was talking about him rescuing Judith. She confirmed that's exactly what this was about. Ilya stared at him, demanding to know why he would do something like that. Aaron didn't have an immediate answer. He hesitated, trying to find the right words to explain his decision. He finally answered, saying he just felt like it was something he had to do. Ilya couldn't believe it. She told him his answer made no sense, because an instructor would have saved Judith anyway. He'd just thrown away a reward from the continent's greatest swordmaster for nothing. She wasn't done. She reminded him that this just gives the people who mock him a reason to keep doing it. Aaron finally looked at her, asking if she was talking about the fact that everyone called him a deadbeat noble. He started to explain. For a long time, he felt like he was stuck in a swamp, completely unable to move. He admitted that he never even tried to get out. He just stayed there, lost. He thought his old self was pathetic. But then, someone reached for him. It was his family. He explained that they were the ones who pulled him out of that darkness. He explained that since so many people had helped him get back on his feet, he couldn't just stand by and watch someone else drown. He smiled and told her that was the only reason he did it. Nothing more complicated than that. Ilya just stared at him, completely silent. Without another word, she turned and started walking away. She asked him to confirm that he'd never even held a sword until last year. Aaron stammered that it was true. She told him that physical training and swordsmanship were completely different. Skill was the most important part of sword training, and because of what he did, he just lost a huge opportunity to be taught by the swordmaster himself. Then she told him she wouldn't be helping him anymore, either. She hoped he wouldn't regret his decision, even if it meant becoming a laughingstock all over again. He called out her name, trying to stop her. She paused and looked back. That's when Aaron asked her why she had helped him in the first place. She paused for a moment, then admitted she wasn't entirely sure why she helped him. She just hated hearing people talk badly about others when they had no idea what they were talking about. Aaron just watched her go, not knowing what to say. Later, all the trainees gathered in the main hall. The instructor stood before them to announce the results, stating that only 113 candidates had passed. He explained that the top 5 trainees would receive a special reward, a private meeting with the swordmaster. But just as he was about to move on, another instructor reminded him that he was leaving someone out. That's when the instructor called out Aaron Pereira's name, telling him to come to the podium. Aaron froze, completely stunned. The announcement sent a ripple through the crowd. Ilya and Brat couldn't believe what they were hearing. The swordmaster began to speak to all the trainees. He explained that competition is a good thing, pushing people to achieve amazing results they never thought possible. But he warned that if you get too caught up in it, you can miss the important things happening right in front of you. He said that Aaron didn't make that mistake. Instead of focusing on his own rank, he sacrificed his position to save a classmate who was drowning. The swordmaster announced that while some might think differently, he and all the instructors agreed that this was an act worthy of praise. He finished by saying that this was the reason Aaron had been called to the podium. That's when the applause started. The whole hall began to clap. Even Judith gave a small clap, but Aaron just looked embarrassed by all the attention. Later, in the swordmaster's office, a young man with blue hair sat quietly. He admitted that he finally understood and that he had been thinking about things the wrong way. The swordmaster told him not to be so hard on himself, explaining that someone who admits their mistakes so quickly isn't truly arrogant. But the young man insisted he had been, and he promised that from now on, he would be willing to learn from anyone. The young man announced he was leaving and turned towards the door. As he left, the swordmaster thought about the student's potential. He saw a young man with great talent who understood his own weaknesses and was determined to fix them. He even had the qualities of a leader. The swordmaster acknowledged the boy had some noble pride, but it wasn't a serious flaw. In fact, he was so good that in any other year, he would have easily been the top student. But this year was different. The competition was just packed with gifted people. The person sitting across from him finally spoke. As a prize, they dared to ask for the swordmaster's personal guidance. The old man just called the request daring. The swordmaster gave them a piece of advice instead. He told them to stop being influenced by others and to live their own life. He said they shouldn't waste time on their obsession here, but should go home and learn their family's sword style. But the visitor wasn't backing down. They insisted on being guided by him personally. The swordmaster sighed, realizing he'd made a mistake, thinking they would listen to reason. So they came up with another idea. Since the office was so big, they asked if they could just train right there. Before he could even answer, they thanked him and made themselves comfortable. The swordmaster let out a long, finally, the last student had arrived. He looked at Aaron Pereira and asked what kind of reward he wanted, making it clear that it didn't have to be a physical item. The old man leaned in, his expression serious. He admitted that out of everyone, he was most interested to hear Aaron's answer. But Aaron didn't ask for a powerful sword or a secret skill. He just wanted to know how to make things right with someone and apologized, admitting it was a ridiculous request. He confessed that he just didn't have anyone else he could talk to about things like this. The swordmaster told him not to be sorry, thanking him for his honesty. He remembered Aaron's story, a boy who'd spent his whole life locked away until he was 15. This was Aaron's first time ever really being around people his own age. The old man knew he must be completely lost. It seemed someone had finally reached out to the kid who'd always been ridiculed. The swordmaster agreed to help, but first, he needed to hear exactly what happened. After their talk, Aaron thanked the swordmaster, saying his advice had been a huge help. The old man was glad, admitting it had been a while since he'd helped someone with something other than fighting. He thought to himself that he never would have guessed Ilya Lindsay would be the one to befriend him. Some things just didn't make any sense. The swordmaster decided they were done talking about Ilya. He told Aaron it was time to move on to the main topic, which left the boy looking confused. He explained that he couldn't, in good conscience, let Aaron's reward be just a few words of advice. He deserved more than that. The swordmaster offered to teach Aaron a lesson about the sword. He said his advice was valuable and that Aaron could ask him anything, but Aaron looked completely lost. He apologized, admitting he had no idea what to even ask. He explained that he'd only started training with a sword a month before coming to the school. It was embarrassing, but he was so new to everything that he didn't even know what he wanted yet. The swordmaster simply said his name, cutting him off. But Aaron kept apologizing, rambling about how he knew it was a huge opportunity to learn from him. He finished by saying that even knowing all that, he could only give this absurd answer. That's when the swordmaster suddenly clapped him on the shoulder, hard. The old man told him there was nothing to be sorry for. He advised Aaron to stop apologizing so much, telling him that a swordsman needs to stand up strong. He asked if he understood. Aaron, still a bit stunned, just managed to say yes. With that settled, the swordmaster decided to postpone the reward. He told Aaron to come back when he felt like he was struggling, or he would just step in and teach him when he thought the time was right. Aaron enthusiastically agreed and thanked him. With that, the swordmaster told him he could go. As Aaron walked away, he was completely unaware that he was being watched. From his office, the swordmaster thought about how special the boy was, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was a different kind of special. Even though Aaron knew almost nothing about the sword, he wasn't anxious or nervous. It was like he already had a clear goal set in his mind. It almost felt like he was getting help from someone. Watching him, the swordmaster was reminded of another special child he knew a long time ago. She had overwhelming talent and confidence, but her personality was completely unpredictable. He admitted to himself, though, that the two of them gave off completely different feelings. Later, Aaron was back in the training hall, pushing himself as hard as ever. That's when Judith walked in. She saw him training and casually asked if he was already planning on swinging his sword around, since their official training started the next day. Aaron asked her what was wrong. Judith looked really uncomfortable, stammering that she had something she needed to tell him. Then she just yelled it out, a loud, awkward thank you. Aaron had no idea what to say. He told her not to worry, promising he'd make sure to repay his debt to her. But Judith just brushed it off, saying it was fine. And then, completely changing the subject, she announced that they should stick together from now on. Aaron was totally lost. Judith repeated herself, explaining that since he was always eating by himself, they might as well just eat together. Before Aaron could point out that she ate alone too, Judith cut him off. She said they could also do their sword training together, grabbing him and insisting it was a great idea. Judith stared him down, demanding an answer. Completely intimidated, Aaron just stammered that it sounded like a good idea. With that settled, she announced she wouldn't interfere with his training and walked off, calling herself his big sis. Aaron just watched, confused, since he was actually 3 years older than her. But as he watched her go, he couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a bad feeling at all. Later, Judith was excitedly asking Aaron if he knew a song about a turtle grilling a sword. Aaron had no idea what she was talking about. Across the room, Brat Lloyd and some other students were watching them. One of them asked Brat if Judith seemed a little odd. Another student wondered if she'd gone crazy after almost drowning. Judith was just joking around with Aaron, but her strange behavior was definitely getting attention. But Brat wasn't focused on Judith. For him, the strangest thing was something else entirely. He looked over at Ilya Lindsay, who was standing alone. He thought it was weird how distant she and Aaron seemed to be, and wondered if something had happened between them. An instructor stomped his foot on the wooden floor, and the whole room went quiet. He had everyone's attention. He announced that sword training was finally starting. He told the students that after 4 months of hard work, they were about to feel the results. The instructor gave them 2 hours to practice freely. The students immediately started picking out wooden swords, and Judith was one of the first to grab one. She took a powerful swing and was shocked. Before, a move like that would have thrown her off balance completely. The instructors watched from the side, smiling. One of them explained that their training was never just about building strength and stamina. Brat Lloyd felt it too. Even with just a wooden sword, he could tell he was completely different from before. He had grown, and the feeling was undeniable. His confidence turned into a more serious look as he watched the others. While everyone else was testing their new strength, Aaron quietly picked up a sword and found a space of his own. Aaron walked past everyone and stopped in the middle of the training hall. His eyes landed on a huge sword hanging on the wall. It wasn't fancy, but it was massive. He reached up and took it down. The sword was heavy, almost like a slab of iron. He gripped it tightly, his expression turning serious. Aaron felt someone watching him. It was the sword master, his eyes fixed on him from across the room. Without a word, Aaron took his stance and swung the giant blade. It was just a simple downward slash, but the force behind it was incredible. The air itself seemed to split apart. The other students just stared, completely speechless. One of the students watching was confused. He didn't think Aaron's form looked all that impressive, but the sword master saw something different. He noted that while the stance was a bit rough, it was surprisingly close to the proper form. Ilya Lindsay just watched from the crowd, her expression unreadable. The other students started whispering. They remembered Aaron saying he'd never had training and decided he was just an ignorant beginner trying to look cool. Suddenly, someone started walking through the crowd. Judith looked over, confused, as Brat Lloyd stepped forward. He walked right up to Aaron, who was still holding the massive sword. Then, pointing his own sword right at him, Brat challenged Aaron to a duel. The entire room went silent. Everyone, from the students to the swordmaster, was completely stunned. Aaron was completely caught off guard. He had no idea what was happening, but his surprise quickly turned into a serious look. The swordmaster just watched, not saying a word. Brat Lloyd stood there, waiting for an answer. With a look of pure determination, Aaron accepted the duel. The other students backed away, forming a circle around them. Aaron and Brat stood facing each other, ready to fight. One of the instructors immediately tried to stop them. He yelled that duels weren't supposed to happen until after the formal classes were over. The other students were just as confused. One of them muttered that Brat was was crazy for challenging Aaron, thinking that just swinging a big sword didn't make him a real fighter. But just as the instructor was about to step in, the swordmaster stopped him. He smiled and said that sometimes you have to make an exception to the rules. He stepped between the two boys and announced to the entire room that the duel would begin. The swordmaster gave them one last warning. He told them to speak up if they felt they were in real danger so the instructors could step in. Both of them agreed. With the rules set, the swordmaster gave the signal to start. Brat didn't waste a second. He exploded forward, closing the distance in an instant. The force of Brat's first strike was immense. Aaron grunted, barely able to hold the heavy sword up to block it. Brat moved with incredible speed, his sword a blur of motion against Aaron's makeshift shield. He looked completely calm, like this was just another day of practice. But Aaron was already panting. Just blocking that one hit had taken a lot out of him. Brat didn't give him a moment to breathe. He was already moving in for another attack. This time, the strike came even faster. Aaron was thrown backward, the impact sending him sliding across the floor. It was a total beatdown. Brat unleashed a storm of attacks, and all Aaron could do was try to survive. The other students couldn't believe it. They thought the fight would be over in seconds, but Aaron was somehow still standing. Judith watched from the sidelines, looking completely annoyed by what she was seeing. Brat didn't let up for a second, continuing his barrage of attacks. That's when it became clear. Brat wasn't just trying to win. He was testing Aaron. He took a moment to analyze him. Aaron's reaction speed wasn't bad, but he completely lost his balance every time he moved. His posture was a mess, and his movements were clumsy. Brat wondered if this guy was even serious about learning the sword. His conclusion was harsh. Aaron was even worse than he'd expected. So if Aaron had no skill, there was only one thing left to test. Brat moved in to see just how much power he had. Aaron's eyes shot open. He had never felt pressure like this before. He gripped the sword with all his might, trying to hold his ground. Brat let out a yell and brought his sword down with everything he had. The force of the blow was immense. Aaron was completely overpowered. Brat stepped forward, pushing Aaron back with pure strength. Their eyes met for a second. The difference in their experience was clear. With one sharp move, Brat knocked the sword right out of Aaron's hands. The heavy blade crashed against the floor. It was over. Aaron was completely stunned. He didn't even process what had happened. Brat stood over him, his sword still steady. The duel had ended. An instructor's voice echoed through the hall, declaring Brat Lloyd the winner. With that settled, the instructor called for everyone's attention. He announced that it was time to divide the class based on their performance. He started reading the names for Class A. Ilya Lindsay, Brat Lloyd, and Judith were among the top 10. They were told to prepare for much harder training. The instructor smiled as he continued down the list, reading off the names for Class B and then moving on to the trainees in Class C. Judith leaned over to Aaron and told him not to worry, that his Class A big sister would look out for him. He just gave a small, unsure reply. After the last name for Class C was called, Judith turned to Aaron with a confused look. His name hadn't been mentioned at all. The instructor finally got to the last name on his list, Aaron Pereira. He was placed in Class F. Aaron just stood there, completely shocked. Later on, Judith was still fuming. She couldn't believe what a jerk Brat Lloyd was. She was convinced Brat only challenged Aaron to make himself look good, and that he was a total scumbag for being so smug about winning. She told Aaron not to get discouraged, promising they could still beat him during the final evaluation. But Aaron was just staring at her quietly. She finally stopped and asked him what was up. He calmly told her not to be so angry. He was grateful she was concerned, but seeing her so worked up because of him was bothering him. Judith's face went bright red as she denied she was worried at all. She started hitting him out of embarrassment, and he begged her to stop, reminding her that side was already bruised. Later, back in his room, Brat Lloyd was still thinking about what happened. He wiped the sweat from his face and just collapsed onto his bed, completely drained. He couldn't stop replaying the duel in his head. There was one moment that really stuck with him. He remembered trying to take the hit head on, but his body moved on its own. He dodged without even realizing it. It wasn't just about the sword. At that moment, Aaron's eyes, his expression, everything about him seemed unbreakable. Aaron was totally focused on that one single slice, and that made him wonder, what kind of expression does he have when he swings his sword? Later, an instructor was questioning Aaron. He asked if Aaron really only knew how to do a vertical and horizontal slice. Aaron admitted it was true and apologized. The instructor, Rune Tarhal, told him there was no need to be sorry. It was normal to be bad at something you've never learned. Then, he said he had a question for him. He asked Aaron what he needed to catch up with trainees who had started years before him. Aaron thought for a moment and guessed. The instructor's answer was a simple, firm no. His hand tightened around the hilt of his sword. In a flash, he swung his blade right past Aaron's head. The force of the swing split a log clean in two. The instructor looked down at Aaron and gave him the real answer, talent. He explained that while hard work is important, it doesn't apply to someone who is more than a few years behind everyone else. Then he gave Aaron a deadline, 1 week. The instructor laid out the challenge. Aaron had 1 week to learn basic sword skills. If he passed, he'd be promoted to Class C. Aaron asked what would happen if he failed. The instructor told him he'd just have to continue training in Class F, but then he put a hand on Aaron's shoulder. His voice got low. He said if Aaron didn't have at least enough talent to pass this test, it would be best for him to just leave the academy. Aaron clenched his fists, promising to do his best. The instructor just smirked and told him to focus on doing well, because trying hard was expected. And with that, training began. Aaron put everything he had into it. On the second day, the instructor was correcting his form, telling him to bend properly and not put so much strength in his shoulders. By day 3, he was was getting praise. And by the 5th day, his stance was already looking good. By the 6th day, Eren was still at it, swinging his sword over and over. The instructor watched, impressed. Eren's speed was improving every single day. He admitted to himself that even he wasn't that good at that age. He realized this wasn't just hard work. The kid actually had a talent for the sword. He paused to catch his breath, completely focused. Later, he found Judith. With the test just a day away, he asked her to watch his form one last time, telling her to be honest if it looked bad. She just smirked and got ready to watch. He put everything he had into the swing, breathing hard. He turned and asked her what she thought. She gave him a thumbs up. He was ready. Later, one of the instructors was sitting in the recovery room when another staff member walked in, surprised to see him there. The instructor just smiled, knowing exactly what he was thinking. He confirmed that his guess was right. Turns out, Eren had passed. He officially made it into Class C. In the dining hall, Judith was absolutely wolfing down her food. She was stacking up empty plates like it was nothing. She suddenly turned to Eren and yelled at him to eat more. She couldn't believe how little he was eating compared to how much he trained. As she ate, 2 other trainees walked by. One of them smirked and called her a hippo, making fun of how much food she was putting away. He didn't stop there. He leaned in and asked if she had a crush on him, then immediately shot her down, saying she wasn't his type anyway. But whatever Judith said back, it hit him hard. He looked absolutely furious, calling her a crazy piece of trash. That's when his friend, Sir Lloyd, stepped in. He told Lance to just stop and walk away. As they were leaving, Lloyd paused for a moment. He told Lance to stop talking bad about people, explaining that it doesn't do him any good. Lance just mumbled that he would. Judith smirked, noticing that the guy who'd insulted her had been pretty quiet lately. Just then, Eren's eyes shifted. He saw someone walking toward their table. It was Ilya Lindsay. She walked over and set a plate of food down without saying a word. Judith noticed the tension right away. She asked Eren if he and Ilya had gotten into a fight. Eren quickly denied it, looking flustered. He was clearly uncomfortable, but Judith didn't buy his answer for a second. Trying to change the subject, Eren asked if Judith had become friends with Ilya since they were both in Class A. Judith wasn't having it. She told him if he was so curious, he should just ask Ilya himself. Eren was totally caught off guard. Then she burst out laughing. She admitted she was just messing with him because his reaction was so funny. Judith explained that nothing had changed with Ilya. She was still number 1 in Class A, and the instructors were always talking about her incredible talent. But her skill was so great that it made everyone else feel small, so nobody ever tried to approach her. Judith admitted she was the same way. She'd heard that Ilya even went to the armory alone every night to practice her family's special swordsmanship. She grinned and told Eren he needed to get promoted quickly so he could go hang out with Ilya. She told him to stop messing around. Eren's expression hardened. He took a deep breath and agreed. The training was about to begin. Without wasting a second, Judith launched her attack. Her swing was incredibly fast, leaving Eren with no room to breathe. He barely got his sword up in time to block, the force of the hit jarring him. He gritted his teeth. Eren knew right away that when Judith got serious, her attacks were on a completely different level. He was completely overwhelmed. Judith wasn't just fast, she was on another level entirely. Every block took all the strength he had. He was being pushed back, barely able to keep his footing, but she didn't give him a moment to recover, calling out her next move before she even swung. Eren met the attack, the impact sending a shock through his arms. She just kept coming, one powerful swing after another. She grinned, clearly enjoying herself and maybe even a little impressed that he was keeping up. That's when she switched it up, launching a powerful upward swing that caught him completely by surprise. The force of the blow sent him flying, knocking the sword right out of his hand. Judith stood over him, admitting he'd improved quite a bit since they last fought, but she made it clear he was still nowhere near her level. She decided that was enough for the day. Eren was surprised it was already over, but she pointed out that they were the only ones left in the training hall. Then with a grin, she suggested that if he went to the armory, he might find Ilya training there all by herself. Eren got flustered and told her to stop, but her words stuck with him. He thought about Ilya, about her incredible focus. So he went to the armory, and there she was, practicing alone. Her concentration was absolute. The sound of someone approaching broke her concentration. She spun around, sword at the ready, demanding to know who was there. It was Eren. He just stood there awkwardly, holding something in his hands. He managed a nervous hello. Ilya didn't look impressed and bluntly asked him what he wanted. He held out a small package tied with a ribbon, explaining that he came to give it to her. He explained it was a letter and a small gift from his home, then worried that maybe it was too sudden. She looked up from the gift, completely confused. She asked him why on earth he was giving this to her. Eren's reason was simple. He told her he had a younger sister. He explained that his sister wasn't very good at dealing with people, and he thought to himself that he was the same way. He explained that he and his sister used to argue a lot because of misunderstandings, but the next day, she would always leave a letter and a gift by his bed to make things right. He admitted that since he was also bad with words, he decided to try writing a letter. He finally understood why his sister liked doing it so much. Ilya wasn't moved. She looked at him suspiciously and asked if he thought this gift would convince her to help him again. Eren just smiled and said it was fine. He apologized for interrupting her training and turned to leave. She just watched him walk away, her expression unreadable. Later that night, Ilya sat at her desk, reading the letter he wrote. A small smile appeared on her face as she thought about how childish he was. She opened the small pouch he'd given her. Inside was a simple bracelet. Suddenly, it hit her. She looked down down at the bracelet he'd given her, her hand trembling slightly. The flower. It was an Amor Adonis. The meaning behind it left her speechless. It was like a powerful memory washed over her all at once. She sat there for a long time, thinking maybe she had been too wrapped up in her own world. The next day, Aaron was back in the training hall. Judith was already there, stretching. She told him they were going to increase the intensity today, but playfully added that he could take it easy if he needed to. Aaron walked back into the training hall with purpose. Judith looked over, confused by his sudden appearance, but he wasn't the only one who showed up. Brat Lloyd walked right up to them. Judith immediately got defensive, asking if he was there to pick another fight. Brat told her to wait, saying he had something important to say. She was completely caught off guard by his serious tone, but then he turned his attention to Aaron. He said he had something to tell him too. Brat looked him dead in the eye and made a proposal that no one saw coming. He wanted to train with Aaron regularly. The other students couldn't believe what they were hearing. He explained that during their fight and the evaluation, he saw a deep concentration in Aaron that he just didn't have. He humbled himself and asked Aaron to teach him that. In return, Brat offered to teach him proper swordsmanship. He wanted them to help each other, make up for their weaknesses, and grow stronger together. Hey, real quick, my mom said this channel would get 0 subscribers. If you enjoyed this story so far, click subscribe to watch the next part.